Hello and welcome back to another episode of Colorado Politicking. I'm Pat Poblete, a legislative reporter with Colorado Politics. And for the first time since the legislative session ended, we are going out from under the Gold Dome to the campaign trail. And political correspondent Ernest Luning has some news about the upcoming U.S. Senate race. Ernest, what do you have for us?
Thanks, Pat. Michael Bennet, Colorado's senior senator, is hitting the campaign trail virtually. This week, he launched his fundraising operation. He had his first grassroots fundraiser. It was held over Zoom, just like this. He had probably close to 100 people, raised about $10,000. It was a decent fundraiser a year and a half before the election. And he talked about the high stakes of Democrats maintaining control of the Senate next year. Colorado isn't as up for grabs as maybe 8 or 9 other Senate seats across the country, but Bennett is still framing it in critical terms. Our democracy had a near-death experience on January 6th, is one way that he put it. Another, he talked about discovering how vulnerable American democracy is based on what Donald Trump and his allies have been trying to do to overturn the election since, which is still going on. Said that the obstruction of Mitch McConnell, if the Republicans take back control of the Senate, just this week said that Democrats aren't going to get a chance to name a Supreme Court justice after 2024 if Joe Biden is president and the Democrats aren't in the majority. So, he's framing it as an important race. So far, though, Michael Bennet doesn't have a heavyweight Republican opponent. He's got a couple of people who have never run for office before and a congressional candidate who lost badly 4 years ago. 4 people are thinking about it, as far as we can tell. Dan Kaplis, who's a conservative radio host who's been talking about running for Senate since 2008. Eli Bremer, who's a party official and Olympian down in Colorado Springs, might decide later this summer to run. Clarice Navarro from Pueblo, who is a state representative and worked in the Trump administration in the agriculture department. And recently we've been hearing that Heidi Ganahl, the CU regent at large, has been thinking about maybe running against Bennett instead of running for governor. We'll see what happens. We should know in another month or two.
That'll definitely be an interesting one to keep an eye on there, Ernest. And from the campaign trail there, let's go into the courthouse and bring in court reporter Michael Karlik. Michael, I know you always have a busy schedule, but this week in particular, you've had your eye on a couple civil rights cases.
Thank you, Pat, and you're correct about that. Let's start with the 10th Circuit, which is the federal appeals court covering Colorado. Now, you're probably familiar with Title IX, which is a federal civil rights law preventing discrimination based on sex in education. Now, the University of Denver had a lawsuit against it from a former student, a male student, who was kicked out after the university found it more likely than not that he sexually assaulted a female student. Now, the student in turn sued the University of Denver, alleging there were flaws and bias against him as a male in the process. A lower court dismissed that lawsuit, but this week the 10th Circuit reinstated it, and they pointed to some specific allegations he had about the investigation. For example, the investigators apparently only interviewed the witnesses of the female accuser and none of his own witnesses. Because of that, they said, there could be an inference of anti-male bias in this investigation. Now, over the past decade or so, there has been a shift in these Title IX investigations from ensuring rightly that the victims, largely female, get justice out of some university process. But now there's a growing concern, and this case is on the leading edge of it, of not railroading male students, who are largely the accused sexual assailants, through this process. The case will head back to the trial court now, so it'll be interesting to see what, if anything, comes out of this anti-male bias allegation. And Pat, I also want to hit on another civil rights decision coming out of the U.S. District Court here in Colorado, involving whether people have the right to record the police in the performance of their public duties. If you ask most people, they would say, yes, you are allowed to record the police in public. And indeed, most courts across this country have ruled to that effect. But for some reason in Colorado, that is not yet established law. The 10th Circuit as recently as this spring declined to say whether the First Amendment actually protects someone's right to record the police in public. Now, this week, there was a court case about a man recording police officers in Lakewood who were performing a traffic stop. He was a bystander, but a police officer allegedly stood in front of his camera and shined a flashlight, preventing him from recording. Unfortunately, the judge tossed his lawsuit, saying there was no clearly established right at the time, 2019, for him to be recording. But in a consequential win for First Amendment advocates, the judge also said that there is now a First Amendment right protecting people who record the police. So that's a major win for civil liberties advocates, and we'll see what the 10th Circuit has to say about that. Now, Pat, I know you had some news out of the Capitol. Would you mind telling our viewers about that?
Of course, Michael, and thanks for kicking it back to me. Now, like I said at the beginning, the legislative session has wrapped up now. So in terms of the lawmaking process, that's done. But what that's left is a stack of bills, probably about the same height as me, I'm 6'4", sitting on Governor Polis's desk. And he's made quick work of those, in particular on some of the session's big priorities, as well as the $800 million state stimulus process. So he's gotten through about half of the 40 bill package in terms of signing those bills into law. We've also seen him sign into law this week bills on transportation, on the so-called public option, which is an attempt to lower healthcare premiums, and what's known as the Prescription Drug Affordability Board, essentially a board that he will convene that will look at some of the most expensive prescription drugs and potentially study those and put price caps on those drugs, kind of driving down the cost of prescription drugs. So that's what's gone on so far this week in terms of the legislative process. Still more yet to come, still some really outstanding bills that are on Polis's desk that I'm sure we'll see move in the next couple weeks. So you'll have to keep it tuned to Colorado Politics for updates on that. But we are running a little short on time now. So for Ernest, for Michael, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.